A rookie sailor broke protocol during a silent drill on a nuclear submarine deep beneath the Atlantic. What happened next stunned the entire crew and nearly turned a training exercise into a full-blown disaster. Let us know in the comments which branch of the military you admire most. The USS Helios glided silently 700 feet beneath the surface, a steel leviathan threading its way through the blackest parts of the Atlantic Trench. Inside, the silence was absolute. No idle chatter, no music. Just the low hum of the life systems and the occasional creak of the pressure outside pressing against the hull. Commander Sullivan stood in the center of the control room, arms behind his back, eyes fixed forward with the calm of a man who had seen war in places most couldn't pronounce. 18 years in submarines had turned his voice into a metronome. Never rushed, never loud, always steady. Seaman Brooks sat at the systems console, barely 6 weeks into his first deployment. At just 19, he was still learning to breathe with the boat, matching his rhythms to the pulse of the crew, the machinery, the deep. But today, everything was different. They were running a silent protocol drill. No speaking, no movement. Unless ordered, every system operating in near-total quiet. Brooks had rehearsed this in simulations, dozens of times. But this was the real thing. And in real life, even simulations didn't prepare you for the weight of the silence. The fear that if you sneezed, the ocean might hear you. Then, something flickered. A tiny pressure fluctuation warning blinked red for a split second on his console. Brooks froze. It was probably nothing. Could have been a sensor twitch. Could have been a valve settling. He should have logged it and waited, but panic doesn't wait. His fingers moved before his brain did. He adjusted the coolant flow manually, without authorization. Click. The mechanical snap echoed through the control room like a gunshot. Everyone turned. Commander Sullivan did not raise his voice. "Who adjusted coolant flow?" he asked, turning slowly. Brooks' face went pale. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Seaman Brooks," Sullivan said, walking toward him. "Did you receive authorization?" "No, sir," Brooks whispered. Sullivan didn't blink. "You compromised the integrity of this drill. If this were wartime and we were being hunted, that mistake could have killed everyone aboard this submarine." Brooks wanted to speak, to explain, but the words never came. Commander Sullivan turned toward the room. Drill terminated. All stations returned to normal operations. The lights rose slightly. Consoles chirped to life, and Brooks sat in the middle of it, cold, shaking, ashamed. Sullivan's voice came once more, like a hammer striking steel. "Seaman Brooks, effective immediately, you are reassigned to Chief McAllen's maintenance unit. You will report there at 0400 hours. Brooks didn't move. He didn't even nod. McAllen, a mountain of a man with grease permanently under his fingernails, appeared moments later with a clipboard. "Let's go, rookie," he grunted. Brooks followed, each step heavier than the last. The silent drill was over, but his real test had just begun. Seaman Brooks spent the next 48 hours in silence, not because it was required, but because he had nothing left to say. He scrubbed filters, changed battery nodes, and crawled through steaming oil-slicked service tubes under Chief McAllen's gruff supervision. Every task was brutal, cramped, and soaked in the stink of old coolant and burnt rubber. He did them all without complaint. McAllen said little. The man's grunts served as orders, his silences as judgments. And the rest of the crew? They didn't laugh. They didn't taunt. They simply didn't look at him. In the tight quarters of the Helios, being invisible was the most painful punishment of all. He ate alone, slept alone. Even his bunkmates started spending nights in an auxiliary station room. The only thing that kept Brooks from breaking was the work. It demanded his focus, his attention. And slowly, without fanfare, he started to learn. He learned how pressure valves behaved when the currents shifted. He learned what kinds of hums meant good systems, and which ones meant death was coming. He learned to listen to the Helios like she was a living thing. By the third day, McAllen handed him a tool set without speaking, not a gesture of friendship, a test. Brooks passed it. At 300 hours on the fourth day, everything changed. A low-pulse sonar contact appeared, brief, then gone. At first, the sonar team logged it as geological, unmapped shelf movement, maybe. But then it returned, slightly closer, and then again, closer still. Commander Sullivan stood in the command room, arms folded, watching the screen in silence. "Still no confirmation?" he asked Lieutenant Brandt. "Negative," Brandt replied. "It's staying on the edge of our passive detection. Could be terrain shadows. Could be a fast scout. Could be a submarine," McAllen added darkly from the back. Brooks, stationed at auxiliary coolant monitoring as part of his new assignment, caught Sullivan's glance. He didn't speak, but he knew. The tension in the room was different now, colder, sharper. Sullivan didn't raise the alert. He didn't have to. The Helios adjusted its depth, down 10 meters, running even quieter. Lighting dimmed across the ship. Secondary systems cut to conserve energy and reduce acoustic footprint. Brooks felt it in the air. The ship was holding her breath. That evening, the sonar ping came again, closer now, and unmistakably artificial. No one spoke the word. But everyone thought it Hunter. Chief McAllen summoned Brooks to Section 6, where a leak had been reported in a secondary cooling line. The hallway was narrow, lit only by red strip lighting. Steam hissed from the corner vent like an angry whisper. Brooks moved quickly, tools in hand. The valve wasn't leaking. It had been now loosened. He froze, turned, and caught sight of a shadow disappearing around the bend. A crewman. An intruder? A saboteur? He chased without thinking, boots thudding softly against the deck. The corridor curved left, then down, empty. He stopped, listened. Nothing. Just the steady thrum of the Helios beneath his feet. When he returned, he tightened the valve, logged the anomaly, but said nothing. Not yet. He needed more. The next morning, the sonar contact vanished. Gone, just like that. The tension eased, slightly. Enough for breakfast in the mess to feel less like a funeral. Brooks sat in his usual seat, alone, until Hensley sat across from him. The sonar tech didn't speak, just opened his ration pack. Brooks watched him. Finally, Hensley said, "You're not as useless as I thought." Brooks blinked. "Thanks?" Hensley smirked. That was a compliment. And then, just like that, the ice cracked. The next shift, another sailor handed Brooks a torque wrench without being asked. The next day, someone offered him coffee. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. He was climbing. Slowly. At 0200 hours, sonar contact returned. This time, it pinged them. Active. Deliberate. Confirmed hostile sonar, Hensley said from the console. Short-range high resolution. Classification? Commander Sullivan asked. Not one of ours, Brandt said. Fast profile, low acoustic signature. Sullivan didn't hesitate. All hands, silent running. Prepare for potential torpedo deployment. The lights dimmed again. The oxygen system slowed to emergency cycle. Even the temperature dropped. Brooks watched the condensation gather on the walls of the service tunnel he was working in. Every breath felt heavier. 20 minutes later, the impact came. Not direct, but close enough. The shockwave rattled the entire submarine, knocking loose a row of unsecured fire extinguishers. Alarms flared in the aft engine section. Fire, contained, within minutes. But it was real. The hunt was on. Commander Sullivan gathered the senior crew in a tight huddle near the navigation alcove. "This is not a drill," he said simply. "We are being shadowed by a hostile submarine, possibly part of an unauthorized surveillance op, or something worse." Brandt frowned. "They're staying just far enough out of torpedo range. They're not here to sink us. Not yet." Sullivan nodded. "They want data. They want to push us. They want to force an error. He looked at Brooks. You know what happens when someone panics during silent protocol, don't you? Brooks nodded slowly. Yes, sir. Sullivan held his gaze. Make sure that's not you again. Brooks stood straighter. I won't let it be, sir. Later that night, as the Helios drifted slowly along the trench floor, Brooks walked past the system's relay station and paused. A panel was open, slightly, a diagnostic loop running, unauthorized. He approached, heart pounding. Inside, the panel. A manual override was rigged, designed to mimic system failure. Brooks traced the wires, his hands steady, and there, tucked behind the relay housing, a transmitter. Tiny, powerful, and transmitting. He yanked it free. Alarms didn't go off. The system didn't fail, but Brooks knew what he was holding. He ran. He burst into the control room, nearly colliding with Commander Sullivan. Sir, he gasped. I found this, in Relay Station 3B. It was transmitting. Sullivan took the device with cold, careful hands. His face was unreadable. Brandt cursed under his breath. McAllen's fists clenched. Sullivan turned to Brooks. You sure? Yes. Sir, he nodded once. Then someone aboard this vessel wants us to be found. Commander Sullivan turned the transmitter over in his hand like it was a venomous snake. The room was dead silent except for the soft ping of sonar and the muffled sound of distant machinery. Secure this, he said quietly, handing it to Brandt. Then, to the comms officer, lock down access to all relay points. Every station, every panel, every hatch gets logged and double sealed. Now. The bridge snapped into action. Sullivan turned to Brooks again, this time with steel in his voice. You didn't panic, he said. You didn't second guess. You followed your gut, and the ship is still alive because of it. Brooks said, nothing. His heart was hammering, but his mind was clear. He was done being afraid of the water. 12 hours later, things got worse. Sonar picked up the hostile again. Close. Too close. Brooks had just finished a pressure check in the hydraulic bay, when the klaxons blared, a muffled, almost reluctant sound in a ship that hated to scream. Torpedo in the water! The words rang out across the ship like a death sentence. Commander Sullivan didn't blink. Evasive maneuvers. Down angle 25 degrees. Release countermeasures. The Helios dove like a ghost escaping a grave. In the dark, with only red. Lighting guiding them, the crew acted as one. Brooks was thrown against a bulkhead as the sub banked hard to port. Alarms wailed. Pipes groaned. Then the sound came. Low. Deep. Thunderous. A detonation. Close. Too close. Sparks rained from overhead panels. Someone screamed on deck 3. Brooks didn't wait. He ran. The torpedo hadn't struck directly. The countermeasures had thrown it off, but not far enough. The shockwave had slammed the aft engine control panel offline. Power was fluctuating. Cooling systems were nearing failure. By the time Brooks reached the control room, Chief McAllen was already barking orders. Get to the secondary pump station and reroute coolant manually. If we lose the core, we're done. Brooks didn't hesitate. He ran toward the bow, toward a hatch no one had touched in weeks. The crawl space was barely wider than his shoulders. The air was hot, metallic, thick with moisture. He squeezed through, flashlight clamped between his teeth, toolkit in hand. Steam burst around him as he reached the emergency valve console. A pipe had cracked. He needed to bypass the main intake. He'd only ever read about how to do this in a manual. He did it anyway, hands slick with grease, eyes burning, lungs screaming, one valve, 2 wires, recalibrate pressure release, reroute flow. The console flickered green, coolant returned. The Helios took a breath. So did Brooks. Back on the bridge, Sullivan watched the sonar screen as the hostile sub circled back for another pass. It wasn't Russian. It wasn't NATO. It was unknown. Its profile was wrong. Too fast. Too silent, and it wasn't here to just scare them anymore. It wanted a kill. Depth charge pattern incoming. Hensley called out. "Estimated impact?" Sullivan asked. 17 seconds. Brace! The Helios bucked like a wild animal as the water lit up around her. One charge hit close, knocking out the rear sonar array. A second ruptured a storage bay. Flooding. Automatic bulkheads slammed shut. Deck 7 was sealed. Brooks stumbled into the bridge, soaked in coolant, cuts on his arms, eyes. "Wide but clear. Secondary systems holding," he said. "But aft pressure's rising." Sullivan stared at him. "You didn't wait for orders," he said. "No time, sir." Sullivan allowed himself a tight nod. "Good. Then, to everyone. We surface. Emergency blow. Now." Eyes widened. Brandt snapped around. "Sir, that'll expose us." "I know," Sullivan said. "But we need to fight." And the ocean, finally, gave them no other choice. With a roar of compressed air, the Helios surged upward. Water howled across her hull as she tore through the depths. Brooks gripped the rail as the G-forces pressed him against the deck. The sub crested at 70 feet. Then, surface. Sunlight cut through the murky green. The hull breached with a massive crash. Spray and steel. Silence. Then a shadow. The enemy surfaced just 200 yards off the port bow. Smaller, sleeker, black like obsidian. No flags. No numbers. It raised a periscope-like antenna and pinged them, openly, aggressively. "This is it," Sullivan said, eyes locked on the screen. "Fire tubes 1 and 2. Brandt didn't flinch. "Aye, sir," the Helios responded. 2 torpedoes launched, silent streaks beneath the surface. The enemy turned. Too late. Impact. The explosion tore through the sea like thunder, foam and fire, metal shards. Then nothing. The shadow was gone. In the aftermath, the crew sat still, sweating, shaking, alive. Sullivan looked over them one by one. "You held your nerve," he said softly. "You held the line." He turned to Brooks. "You didn't just redeem yourself. Sailor, you saved us." Brooks didn't smile. He just nodded. He understood what it meant now. Discipline wasn't about being the best. It was about showing up when the world tried to break you and not letting it. The ocean was calm. After the blast that sank the hostile submarine, the sea returned to its endless, deceptive stillness. Foam still danced in ripples where the detonation had occurred, but the threat was gone. The Helios floated at surface level, damaged, bruised but unbroken. Below deck, repairs had begun. Above deck, silence lingered. The kind of silence that came after adrenaline left the body and left behind only exhaustion and awe. Commander Sullivan stood on the control deck, watching the sonar monitors display nothing but a blank sweep. Finally, nothing. No threats, no ghosts, just the deep. 3 hours later, the crew gathered in the forward mess, those not critical to systems repair. No one spoke at first. Then Sullivan entered. He didn't stand on a platform, didn't ask for attention. He just stood among them. "I'm not going to praise you for surviving," he said. Some eyes rose, some didn't. "Because survival is not the goal," he continued. "It's the standard. You survived because you remembered your training. Because when it mattered most, you didn't let panic or ego dictate your decisions. You let discipline take the wheel." His gaze passed over the room. "You want to know the real difference between a mistake that gets people killed and a mistake that becomes a lesson?" He let the silence stretch. "It's what you do next." Then he turned slightly. "Seaman Brooks." Brooks stood, stiff but steady. "You made a mistake, one that could have cost lives, and then you learned. You listened, you fought, you served." Sullivan walked over, pulled a cloth from his pocket, and unwrapped a small silver pin, polished. Simple. He held it out. Brooks took it, a maintenance insignia, nothing official. But among submariners, it meant everything. "You didn't just return to duty," Sullivan said. "You made yourself essential." Brooks saluted. No word spoken. but his eyes said what his voice couldn't. I'm ready. The next day, the Helios submerged again, this time heading toward safe waters. The enemy was gone, but the lessons remained. Brooks resumed his post, not in shame, but in focus. Hensley, the sonar tech who once ignored him, now nodded in passing. Chief McAllen handed him tools without looking over his shoulder. Even Lieutenant Brandt cracked half a smile at one of Brooks's reports. It was slow, but it was real. Trust wasn't given, trust was earned, and now he had earned it. That night, Sullivan found Brooks alone in the observation blister, staring into the infinite black. The commander stood beside him. "You think the sea cares about medals?" he asked quietly. Brooks shook his head. "No, sir." "You think it cares about mistakes?" Brooks hesitated. "Only if you don't learn from them." Sullivan nodded. "There are two kinds of men in the Navy," he said. "Those who crack when the pressure mounts, and those who forge themselves into something harder." Brooks swallowed. "And which am I?" Sullivan turned to him. "You tell me." When the Helios returned to port 2 weeks later, the sun was rising. Families waited. Flags flew, but the crew didn't rush to disembark. Not right away. They stood in formation first, sweaty, worn, scarred, but whole. Commander Sullivan addressed them one final time. "This mission was more than data," he said. "It was more than drills or orders or uniforms. It was about this, what we are down there, when no one can see us, when there's no applause, when it's just you and the sea and the silence." He paused. "Some of you showed who you were. Some of you found out who you could be, and all of you, you came back." He stepped down. No salute, just truth, and that was enough. On land, mistakes are lessons. Underwater, they're death sentences. What Seaman Brooks learned wasn't how to be perfect. It was how to stand back up when you failed, how to hold steady when fear crawled up your spine, how to trust yourself, your training, and, above all, your crew. Because submarines don't survive on power. They survive on discipline, on courage in the quiet moments, on choices made when no one's watching, and on the willingness to carry the weight of 100 souls and never let it crush you. What would you have done 700 feet below the ocean, with your crew counting on you and your own fear trying to take control? Would you have held the line? Would you have chosen discipline or panic? Tell us in the comments. We want to hear what you do when everything is on the line. If this story moved you, if it made you feel what it's like to serve deep under pressure, subscribe to Authority Watch. Real courage, real consequences, real stories, only here.